this is so expensive starting a product range from scratch. And Amazon was around at the time. And I was like, well, as a small fish like us, we cannot compete with them on logistics, price, or anything. What we can do is
Welcome to the My Wife Quit Her Job podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have Raphael Schneider on the show. Raphael is the CEO and editor-in-chief of the Gentleman's Gazette, and he also runs a successful e-commerce business over at Fort Belvedere. And he's probably one of the best dressed men that I know personally. And he actually also sells handkerchiefs, among other high-end men's accessories and clothing. Now, hanging with Raph is tough because random people on the street always ask for photos with him. So literally you can't get down the street without someone like accosting him because he's that famous. He runs a killer YouTube channel, is a master of content, and today we're going to find out how he's managed to create such a successful business. So welcome, Raphael. How you doing, man?
well, thank you, Steve, for such a glowing introduction. I think I've never gotten something that detailed. And I also realized I haven't updated our description because I'm no longer the editor-in-chief and I haven't done it in a while. So where did you get that
No
from?
way. Okay. Well, it's still on the main site.
Okay.
I didn't realize. When did that happen?
We'll have work to do. Oh, like we hired a content person a while back. Because, as you know, in the beginning, you just start on your own and you do everything and you wear all hats. And then it just gets too much. And I realized that burnout. And it was actually talking to Antonio. He was like, well, you're still doing everything yourself. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, I have these virtual assistants and it really has transformed my business. I was like, tell me more about that. And I also fondly remember Influential because I that was when we really had time to talk and connect.
Yep.
Because we hung out there. I think you're so popular at Ecommerce Fuel. There's so many old and well-known faces that when I didn't know you, and it wasn't like we had just 3 hours over lunch that we could talk, right?
So that's true.
I really enjoyed that.
But again, you are constantly accosted by random people who want a picture with you. I remember at Klaviyo, like, oh, is it okay if I take a picture? I'm like, who is this guy?
Yeah, it's when you have a YouTube channel, right? It's like I remember that in the beginning it was a very interesting concept because we started with written content because we started in 2010 and blogging was the thing.
Yep.
And then I remember doing surveys on the side. It's like, hey, what would you like more content of? And in the back of my head, I was like, well, they're going to want video. And then I got back to survey results and it was like, we want more written content. And I was like, a bit disappointed. And then it didn't dawn on me until much later, right? If you ask a group that comes to your site because you offer written content about what they want more of, they're going to tell you written content. Now, I still forged ahead and we dabbled in YouTube early on and then didn't do it because I felt like I couldn't do it as perfectly as I would have wanted to. And that was a big mistake. I should have just said, no, just do it and don't be afraid. Don't, let the fear take over. And so we started in, I think, 2014, 2015 to really focus on it. And it was a transformation. Right now, people had a face and they connected over it. And I think that was really pivotal because now we get a lot more views on YouTube than on our website. Right.
Yeah.
And if we just had kept doing the same thing, we just would have been on the website and no one would know my face really. But this way, it's surprising sometimes that, you go to UPS, right? Or you're at like this Chinese restaurant, very humble, and you go there and they're like, hey, I love your videos. Or, I'm wearing my bike helmet, all sweaty. And they're like, hey, I love your videos, Sven. It's just really cool to see. That part, of course, in the last 2 years, that has toned down because I'm not out and about. People are out and about. You have a mask.
Right.
I think once at Whole Foods, a guy came up to me and was like, hey, I love your YouTube videos. And I'm impressed. Like you can see my eyes and my voice. That's it. Right.
Well, you were probably well dressed. I mean, you stand out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like dressing and you automatically stand out if you don't, if you dress differently. It's like, oh, who's that guy? Right?
Actually, I was going to ask you this later, but let's cover it now. So when did you actually start dressing nicely? My wife is actually always trying to get me to dress better. But for me, like, I don't know, it takes a lot of effort. So when did you get into fashion?
It was, not in my childhood. Like my parents didn't pay too much attention. My dad liked more like loud, unusual things, in clothes or cars or whatever. My mom, not at all. And I just got, whatever was on sale or hand-me-downs, really. And it wasn't until I was a teenager I started buying fountain pens on eBay. Like in Germany, grew up in Germany, so I went to school there, and you start writing with a fountain pen, no ballpoint pens. Right, that's what you write with. And so I heard this brand Mont Blanc, and on eBay was pretty new back then, and they didn't have any age limits, so I think I could sign up at the age of 14. And I bought an expensive fountain pen, and I got it, and I was like, this doesn't actually write better than my $5 Lamy school pen. So I sold it again, and I made twice as much money. And it was like, wait a second. So I quit my paperboy job, and I started buying fountain pens and selling them on eBay. And that was my job. That's how I made money. And so I would buy lots of stuff and then sell them individually. And I once got a pair of cufflinks, because Mont Blanc also made cufflinks. And I was like, well, what do I do with that? I probably can't sell that. And was like, oh, I need a shirt for cufflinks. Oh, now I have the shirt with the French cufflinks. What do I do next? And then I found this book called Gentleman from Bernhard Rötzel. And this kind of whole world kind of opened up for me. And that my interest evolved. And I was like, wow, this is awesome.
I remember talking to Antonio. So I don't know how you met Antonio, but I was at an event, I think it was Blog World. And then all of a sudden, I had no idea who Antonio was. This really well-dressed guy just sits next to me. And he says, hey, Steve, what's up? And I was like, who is this? But he was well-dressed. And he, Antonio's really confident, right? And so we just started chatting, and then we became friends. And then we started talking about fashion. And I asked him, hey, you're like the best dressed guy here. He's like, yeah. The reason I do that is because it gives me confidence and I stand out, right? Is that like a similar thing for you at conferences and events also, or?
When I started, right, it came from this like interest and passion. I'm a highly curious person. And then I also just wanted to learn more about it. Reflecting now, I think it is definitely a big part of it, right? It's like this, when you stand out in a way you're known for. And I noticed that when I'm, in London or wherever, like people come up to you and ask you for directions, right? And what I realize is we all judge, right? We are like, hey, don't judge. We don't want to judge, but we all do. It happens in like microseconds and we're not even aware of it, right? You're like, oh, this is a well-dressed man, he's probably trustworthy, he's rich, like all these associations we have come through, and there is a benefit to that. Now, it just happens to align with an interest. I didn't come from that angle. I think Antonio is much more scientifically interested in coming from that angle, right?
Yeah.
So we came from different angles, but we both fully understand the power of it. And yeah, when you go to a conference, right, it's like, oh, there's that well-dressed guy that walks around, you got to meet him, right? And so it's very easy for people to remember you, because they're like, I see this guy, I know who he is. Ah, yes, right? Versus if you're just one out of many, you have to stand out in a different way.
I usually stand out by saying random stuff and being loudmouthed. Maybe your method's probably better, I'm guessing. What's funny though is it's one thing to be well dressed, but it's another thing to actually sell men's apparel, which in my opinion is actually one of the hardest things to sell online. Right?
Really? Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Every store sells men's apparel. So when did you actually start the store? Did the YouTube and the content come first, or did the store come first?
Actually, the blog came first. It was content. I came to the US in 2009 as an exchange student. I went to law school. I realized I hated it. I hated law. But I still came because it was an opportunity for me to come to the US and get a degree. I had met my wife in 2006 during an exchange semester. So we got married, and then I couldn't work because I didn't have a work permit. And I was like, well, what do I do now? It was 2009, 2010. No one hired anyone, let alone a foreigner without work experience. And so I was like, let's do this blog thing. And then was like, hey, I was like, how long does it take to make $100,000? And I was like, if you do it well, about 5 years. And my wife was supportive of me and said, I believe in you. I think you can do this. I'm gonna do the day job and make some money, and then we can figure it out. It was like, cool, let's do this. And then I would write about stuff, and it's like, oh, where do you get this pair of gloves from? It was like flea market in Vienna, right? Not really useful. And then I was like, well, maybe we could create that stuff, because in my spare time I had visited shoemakers and shirt makers and umbrella makers, and it was just a hobby. And I was like, well, I already have contacts. I know where I could get that. People don't, so why not create something out of this? And I didn't go to business school. I didn't have any business degrees. I didn't think it through and was like, well, what's a better opportunity? I didn't have a community of entrepreneurs that I could tap into. And I thought, oh, well, we already have this content side, and we have followers, and people are going to love our stuff, and it's just going to fly off the shelf, and they're going to buy it. And I was wrong. It took us like a year to kind of just develop everything. And I remember, renting space in a self-storage facility and have products in there, because not everything came. And I'm not naturally a good project manager, so it dragged out. But I think we first started selling in 2014, but we first conceptualized the idea in 2012. And this eBay experience I had earlier really helped me, because what I realized was I liked the marketing, I liked the photography, and I hated waiting in line at the post office to ship something and to pack things up. And so from the very first day, we worked with a 3PL, which I think a lot of times people don't do. They kind of self-fulfill.
Yep.
And so I skipped that step because of that past experience. And then once we had the e-commerce channel, we did YouTube. And at the time, Shopify was technically around, but it was not known at all, at least not to me. So we started with Magento, because I looked at all the platforms and I was like, well, if we ever have to upgrade to enterprise version or whatever, I'm already on the same platform, and the transition is probably going to be easier. And so that's what we chose, Magento.
Are you still on Magento?
We're still on Magento. Yes.
Wow. Okay. I remember evaluating shopping carts, and Magento was on my list, because back then it was, like the standard for larger shops. But then I looked at the code, and it was really hard to understand. And then you required hefty hosting and had all these little quirks. So I actually skipped Magento. But power to you.
Yeah. I think, if you start today, most people will start there, right? Because it's easy, it's lower stakes, it scales. There's so much you don't have to worry about. But at the time, I didn't know that was an option. And then, once you're in the system, you're like, well, we're doing all these things. What's the cost of switching now? And I'm still reevaluating. I'm not married to Magento or anything. But it was also like we had this good team. I felt like they were really on top of things. It was really affordable, like, doing the math.
Yep.
Your SaaS apps versus, one-time payment apps versus how much do I pay per year to maintain it. But there's lots of things that go into it. And
you don't have to tell me that. I'm actually still on an open source shopping cart myself. I never made the switch to Shopify, and it's free. I have to touch it maybe once every 5 to 10 years to do an upgrade. So it hasn't been that bad. I'm curious with your blog. So you started that, you said, in 2012 or?
I started in 2010.
2010. Okay.
February 2010.
How long did it take you for that to take off? I mean, you had a 5-year plan, you said, but did you hit 6 figures earlier than that?
Yes, way earlier. And so then we were like, let's do this other stuff. Because in the beginning we had, private advertisers, like, brands in our space, like that knew and valued the content and the audience. So that's how we kind of made our money early on, was ads.
Okay.
And for a while I thought maybe, we're going to do it like Huffington Post. And since we started with $300 each, like I put in 300 and Teresa did 300, so 600 total. I think in 2011 we founded the LLC with that capital. We were like, well, yeah, we can't buy traffic, we can't buy links or anything. We'll just do organic traffic. That was the strategy, organic traffic. And in the beginning, it worked really well because, you'd optimize stuff. And I was like, I'll post every day. And then I realized, I'm going to burn out. And I want to be the best piece of content on this given topic I write about. In the beginning, it worked super well, but then after a while, you realize, your old posts lose in the SERP results. So you have to redo them or do something else with them. And then you always have some that gain and others that lose. So net, you maybe just shrink or you maybe increase very slightly. But I think that was our competitive advantage, understanding SEO early on.
Mm-hmm.
And also I never kind of succumbed to these like short-term fixes or gains, like, because in the early days you could really like
you could game it,
add more keywords to your stuff, right? And I had read about like Sergey Brin and like that they modeled Google after academic journals, and the idea was that they wanted people to that they became more important the more often they were cited, right? If you're cited by a famous journal or by New York Times, you become more important yourself. And they're like, long term, our vision is to provide the best search result for humans. And so that was my approach. I was like, if we write really good content for humans, I will never have to go back and make all these changes that I just did for search engines, but not for humans. So that has always been our approach. Now, does it mean you never have to go back and update things? No, because, we grow, we learn, we add questions and all that stuff. But I think overall, that helped us grow pretty quickly.
So you had these blogs that were ranking in search, and then you had brands advertising. You mentioned when you first launched your e-commerce store, which was the logical step, right? Because people were asking for these products. Why did it not work out in the beginning?
I think, our egos, or my ego, told me like, wow, you have these thousands of people who come to your website. If I look at a conversion rate of 1%, at an average order value of that, I should get X. And then when you actually had the shop and it was less than that, you're like, oh, yeah, because these people come for content. They don't come to shop necessarily, right? And just because they know, or I thought they would know me and know the brand and trust it, like that wasn't enough. I realized, no, you actually need a really robust marketing system. And at the time we had, I'd found like Infusionsoft.
Oh, okay.
And I found a company that integrated Infusionsoft with Magento. So we had quite a bit of data and kind of, I felt for the size of our business, we're quite advanced in that field with automated email flows or sequences or whatever you want to call it, campaigns.
Yeah.
That was pretty good. But I just realized too, it's like, you need to have supporting content and really kind of show people what they get when they buy from you and what they get when they buy from others, and then let them decide, right? But we didn't have like a well thought out marketing plan, and our photos were like white background. It didn't occur to me that maybe the clothes should be shown on people in a environment that people would like to be in. I just had looked around and was like, people do white background stuff, so that's what I have to do.
Right.
But I didn't know, I didn't have mentors. That it was really a lot of trial and error.
I'm just curious though. So you have this site and you're selling men's apparel. I noticed you sell like shoes and stuff too, right? Was sizing ever a problem?
That was a consideration we made, and we did not sell shoes on the website. We, for a brief moment, like sold them, try to sell them offline. But in the beginning, we had this limited amount of capital, and we made some money with advertising. But it was like, man, this is so expensive starting a product range from scratch. And Amazon was around at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, as a small fish like us, we cannot compete with them on logistics, price, or anything. What we can do is compete on quality. And I also felt like there was stuff that I couldn't find in the market, and I wanted to provide that. So it was very clear that we wanted to have our own brand and not just slap our name on something that you could find elsewhere, but that it was unique to us and defensible. And maybe that was part of my head, was always this idea of, if you do it the hard way, it's more defensible because people will not be interested because they want to do it the easy way.
Right.
So I felt long term that was a better thing to defend. I mean, in my head, right? That's what I thought.
I actually 100% believe in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just, that was, the strategy I developed together with Teresa, we're like, okay, that's, I think, the path we want to do. And it was also the most personally satisfying path, right? Like creating your own product exactly to your specifications. It's much more fulfilling than just buying something from someone and put something on. And I realized, money wasn't my only driver. I realized it early on because there were like, supplement stuff and you could do. And I was like, that doesn't jive with me. Yes, we all want money and it's great, but it's not what really kind of made me do things. And I've especially when I always had this long-term vision, right? So then I didn't care so much about, can I make a quick buck here now? Because I was fortunate enough to be in a position where we had enough to live by, right? I remember early on, sometimes like there was this food shelf and a neighbor was like, well, they have all that stuff they don't use. I was like, well, I'll go there. I'll get the food shelf rejects. Why not? Like save some money, can put more money into business and stuff. So yeah, I was always very resourceful. Let's put it that way.
In the beginning, you said you were selling other people's brands. Was that in the beginning, or you were selling your own?
We never sold other people's brands.
Oh, you didn't? It's always your own brand. Okay.
From the get-go, it was our own brand because that we were like, let's do that, and let's have just that. And then it was like, what shall we name it? And Teresa was like, well, English Country House. And was like, well, how is it connected to clothes? And then Fort Belvedere is the house of the Duke of Windsor, who was a very kind of rakish dandy, always well-dressed, most photographed man of the world in the 30s, which is, in the classic style realm, considered to be the golden era of men's style. So it was like, oh, that's a good connection. Domain was available, trademark was available. I went to law school, so I thought about that, right? Trademark.
Yeah, nice.
Can we do that? Yeah, for the Gentleman's Gazette, I hadn't thought about that yet quite then. And then that was harder to get because they were like, well, Gazette for gentlemen.
What were your first best-selling products?
I think in the beginning, I had this friend and he was like, well, when you go to a store, you don't just want to walk in and have one product. So it was very clear for me that we didn't just want to be a one product brand. One thing that I was most proud of and was the most unique one, and I also think we sold the most, was boutonniere flowers. It's like flower. I don't have one today, but you wear it through your lapel hole, basically. Mm-hmm. And my wife's family, they went on a cruise. And I had never been on a cruise, and we were there, and you wear a tuxedo and black tie. And I was like, well, I'd like to wear a flower. But on a cruise ship, the flower selection is limited. So I once had this like gigantic big rose that stood up straight. I was like, well, that doesn't look like in the 30s. And I was like, well, what would it take to make boutonnieres that look like flowers that I could bring on a cruise? And that's how that developed. And so that was really like, that market, I don't think was super developed. It was in its infancy, right? I'm not saying no one else had done that before, but the way we did it was really a first, and we sold that well. But even there, we had to kind of, promote it, show it to people, see what's going on. And I realized everything we sold in the beginning didn't sell well until we put a lot of marketing behind it.
Marketing as in paid or YouTube?
No paid marketing.
No paid marketing, okay.
Because for us, we always felt like it was expensive and it changed so much that I felt like I had to invest so much energy in keeping up with the changes that, and in my opinion, that's always something that people often don't calculate in their ad spend. They're like, oh, I'm spending that much, I'm getting that ROI, and that's my cost of acquisition. Well, how much do all these people cost that you have to be involved in this process? Which is quite a bit. I know a lot of e-commerce owners that spend a considerable amount of time on managing their ad spends and ad budgets. And I didn't want to do that. I was like, I believe more in this organic realm.
Right.
And just figuring it out, right? It's like most e-commerce people, I think when they start out, they make these product videos that you would typically put on a product page that are just like explainer videos or feature videos, I call them. And then after a while, maybe, you realize, well, there's other videos you could make, right? This like, what's the best pair of socks, right? And where you compare stuff and understanding what actually drives sales and what doesn't, right? Because sometimes you see these super fancy brand videos, 90 minutes with 120 cuts and this emotional music. And you're like, wow, this feels amazing. But then you look at the view count and it's like 520 people watch this. I'm like, if there's maybe something that 500,000 people can see, right? And it resonates with them, maybe that's a much better sales driver than that. And then it's like, what are all the things we have to do, right? How much text do we have to write? What kind of pictures do we have to provide? What about social media? How can we utilize that, right? And yeah, that stuff.
So can we talk about then which types of YouTube videos work the best for you? You mentioned best ones and comparison videos. What else is in your arsenal?
I think what we've decided to do, as we along the way, was to say we want to create content for a core audience, but if you just appeal to this core audience, you are kind of limited to that. So we realized, also talking to Eric Bandholz and others, to have like a 3-tiered approach, right? Top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, and then just structure videos is to say, well, what appeals to people, right? So one of our most successful videos by view count is a video on table manners. Now, we don't sell anything related to tableware, right, or linens or anything like that. But our thought process was that, well, a person interested in table manners will likely have there's a chance that they're also interested in what we do. So we look for that kind of correlation, right? And then a middle of the funnel video could be something like best wallets for men, right? Something like that. Mm-hmm. And then a bottom of the funnel video could be very specific, like how to identify the quality knit ties, something like that, right? So you funnel it. And sometimes you think a video is a certain funnel, and then it turns out to be very different. One thing we notice is like, if a video sparks curiosity, that's when you hit the jackpot. Because YouTube basically, right, they're based on numbers. So they look at what is the click-through rate from the thumbnail. So it's like, how does the thumbnail look? And what is the title? And then what is the average watch time of the video? Not just on this one video, but how many videos are people going to watch, not just on your channel, but overall? Because the longer they can keep people on the platform, the more money they make, the more interested they are in showing it. And so when you look at it and analyze that, that really helped. And YouTube provides a lot of great information where you can look at your audience retention and you can see, oh, when I say this, there's a drop. When I say this, people watch it again, right? And so you can, same with your thumbnails, you can like, hey, I'll do this, and this is my click-through rate. I'll do that, and that is my click-through rate. Sadly, you can't A/B split test, but you do what you can with a platform to figure out what works and what doesn't. And I think,
share with me one of these titles that create mystery that's worked with you. Do you have any in the top of your head that you remember?
Yeah, like for example, we did a series called, Why Did Men Stop Wearing Hats? Why that? And that's just something that's really curious for people. I think for e-commerce people, if I meet someone in e-commerce and they're like, well, we're thinking of getting into video, I just say, go through your customer, look at the 100 most asked questions they ask, and then make videos about that, right? Don't make a product video about the features and stuff. Just look at what do your customers do and what's happening. And lately also it dawned on me, we always have the tendency to say, well, we want a lot of people to watch our videos, and that's great. But actually what can happen is it can be really bad for your channel. So there was this lady, she had this DIY channel on YouTube, and on average she'd get about 150 to 200,000 views on her videos in the first week. Well, now COVID hit, she made a video about DIY masks, right? We're like, well, DIY, masks, super popular right now. So the video blew up, super successful. Well, now subsequently, when she brought her regular DIY videos out, people started, YouTube recommended those new videos to the audience who also watched a DIY mask video. And they're like, nah, I don't care for that. So then YouTube sees extremely low click-through rate. Oh, people don't like that. And now she only gets about 20,000 views in a new video in the first week, right? So I think when you develop a strategy on YouTube, you have to understand that maybe people want you to stay in your lane, right? I think we did once a video where, Gentlemen's Gazette do gentlemanly things. We talk about etiquette, but then we talked about steak, right? And because I was like, well, men like steak. Let's do a steak guide. But realistically, people don't come to us for steak advice, right? And then the audience you groomed now is steak, and they're like, what is this? Am I a cooking channel? And then they drop off. So I think if I could avoid one mistake on YouTube, that would be it.
That
Trying
story
to
is
be
just like my
everything.
buddy.
Okay.
He runs a personal finance channel. And during the pandemic, he started talking about stimulus checks. So that's where all the traffic was. And he was getting millions of views. But then now that the stimulus is over, those people aren't watching any of his other videos. Different demographic. He targets like investments, people with money. And you're right, that totally destroyed his channel.
Yeah. So it's sometimes this short term versus long term, right? And so we naturally always kind of had at the back of our mind, who is the person we're talking to? What do we want? What do we want? And so that helped us kind of stay the path and not jump on these shiny objects like the stimulus checks. We're like, right? And we all like intuitively these like big opportunities, blue ocean kind of thing. I think sometimes like staying the course and being true to you can really help. Same with the thumbnails, right? It's like there was a time when these like crazy rainbow thumbnails were super popular, right?
Yeah.
And like, well, how does that jive with our brand, right? Like it doesn't. And what I realized too through like Eric Bandholz in all of that, the strongest thing we have and can develop is the brand. Otherwise, we're just commodities and someone comes in and, sells it for less or whatever. But yeah, so in the back of my head, I'm like, Ralph Lauren, that kind of visual identity brand that he created, where people are like, I want to be like that. I'll live in that house. That is just much more defensible than if you are just, a supplier of ties or pocket squares. And in the beginning, I thought, well, let's do a lot of ties in 3 different lengths. In reality, there's lots of ties out there. So it's much harder to sell it than maybe, a special set of pocket squares or something's like a boutonniere where there's just not as much competition out there. And I think I like that. I never like fields like, personal real estate where I feel like there's so many people competing in that pool and it's people try to outdo each other by working harder. I like to be kind of a big fish in a small pond rather.
Interesting. So for your YouTube videos, and I think I asked Eric Bandholz this question, do you have a way of tracking people, or is it just an uplift based on, when a video hits, you just naturally see a correlation in sales?
Yeah, no, it's a good one because that was always, one thing that kept me from like wanting to spend a lot on advertising was like, well, how do I know the attribution? Because what I saw was like, well, I sold $100,000 worth of stuff, but if I add up all my attribution, I sold $300,000 worth of stuff. So I was like, well, I didn't. I only sold 100,000. Everyone claimed credit for everything 100%. I was like, well, that's not how life works,
right?
And then we found this thing called I looked at different attribution platforms, and we found it like Wicked Reports.
Yep.
So we did that, and we got in early, so we pay a really nice price. I think it's a lot more expensive now, but the concept behind it is like that you basically add UTM parameters to everything. Because on YouTube, people will likely just click through cards, click through a link in the description, and that way you can really have a better click attribution. So that now there's, I think, more sophisticated solutions in the market where they're like, well, we use click data, we use view data, and if you have a video that goes viral and we see a correlating spike in sales, then we attribute that much to it and stuff, right? So I always like that attribution. So we could, on our back end say, well, we produce this type of content and this is what happened. But a lot of people like to always focus on, the sales, right? It's like, oh, how much did it sell? But I also realized, well, there is, you have these micro conversions where it's like, maybe they became a subscriber, right? Maybe they became a subscriber on YouTube. Maybe they just, came back and watched it. And even if they can't buy right now, they tell a friend about it. So to me, there's more success than just how much did I sell, right? And for us, It's also like, how much advertising does it generate? But then also we have a value of like, does this further our brand and brand value, right? So if we do a video about, let's say, what it means to be a gentleman today, right? And even if this video had minimal amount of views, no sales, I would still consider it a success in the sense that we foster this kind of culture that our brands stand for. And I think that's important too, and brand building probably. And I think one thing that I'm proud of what we're doing is that we're not just analyzing the market like, SEO analysts and saying, well, what are all the things that are out there? We'll do what's best and try to outrank people or create skyscraper content, but that we actually sit back with people who love this passionately and say, what would a person really want? And that allows us to create innovative content that wasn't around before. And someone you hit a home run where you didn't know it existed, right? Because no one else talked about it. You just created something, and I think people over the long term will notice, right? If you see the 6th video about confidence and why you should do this or that, right? And just spun in a different way. I think Antonio has like 4 videos on how to roll up your shirt sleeves, for example.
I mean, he's been doing it a long time. He's got variations of everything.
Exactly, but they've been super popular, right? And that's great. And we've done a redo of a how to fold a pocket square video because we felt like, this is so old, this could be a lot better. Let's do it. But I'm like, I was like, hey, I'm proud of doing something new, right? And then other people are like, oh, they did this, was successful, we're going to do it. And that's okay, right? I'm not like, I had this idea, or our team had this idea and we own this. I'm like, yeah, someone else can just pick it up and make a better video. And that's cool. And I can do the same, right? It's an ecosystem, but we try to not just look at the numbers, but also look at it from a brand and individual perspective. Yeah.
And it sounds like you're able to spot trends before they become popular, right? So that you're essentially like the pioneers once it does become a mainstream.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are a niche content. I think none of the stuff we do is really mainstream. So I don't really look at that too much. It's like,
well, people are stopping on the streets, so it's kind of mainstream.
Okay. I know what you mean. Yeah. Okay. I see what you mean. Yes. Yes and no. I'm like, if we talk about attaché cases, I don't think attaché cases will ever be mainstream, or like what hat fits your face shape. Like fedoras are not mainstream. I don't believe they're going to be mainstream, but I believe there's an audience that we can serve that, right? And then you're like, oh, people who like fedoras are also interested in ascots, stuff like sometimes people who like to dress in a special way, right, are interested in those unusual accessories, for example. So like, okay, let's focus on that. Then of course you can have something like socks, right? Or the market for socks is a lot bigger than the market for boutonnieres, or maybe even pocket squares, right? Because a pocket square for most men, it's like a celebratory thing. At my wedding, I want my pocket square, my handkerchief. It's not like they wear that every day. With socks, you have the opportunity that someone potentially wears it every day. And I think, when you talk to like business analysts, they're like, well, do you have a subscription product? No. Do you have a consumable product? Well, kind of. But with a brand, right, if you build your brand on like quality and longevity, that kind of goes against that. But we're like, we still like that. And maybe there are opportunities to do, consumables, like, the razor companies or whatever, where you're like, hey, you need new blades, right? Every deodorant companies, all that stuff. Maybe we'll have a gentlemanly deodorant, right? Where we're like, we really like that. We like the scent profile for that reason. And even Eric from Beard Brand, they started with beard oils. Well, now they have hair products, and soap, and things that are accessible to everyone, not just people who are into beards. I'm still sure that they sell most of their stuff to people who have some connection to beards, right?
Yes.
My wife is not going to say, oh, let's buy soap from Beard Brand, unless she maybe smelled it and was like, this is amazing, right? And I want that. But at first, it's like, that's not for me. I don't have a beard. Like, why would I buy Beard Brand soap?
Has your YouTube channel revenue, I don't know what the revenue breakdown is, but I assume you make more from the e-commerce than you do just YouTube revenue. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
We make about 25% from ads. There's website ads, there's YouTube ads, and then there's website revenue. Now, that being said, we can definitely see a change in what is called RPM, revenue per 1,000 views.
Yep.
It's definitely going up. And personally, I think, looking at, I don't know, TV ads and what people pay there, and YouTube, what people pay there, I'm hopeful that in 5-10 years from now, the RPMs on YouTube will be a lot higher. And of course, if you are a main player there and you can get the higher RPMs and you can increase your audience and your footprint, I mean, that can lead to massive growth. And of course, that kind of revenue is, there's no returns department, there's no customers.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Like, if it's big enough, would you ever consider just becoming a media mogul, on YouTube, as opposed to?
I like, my vision is that we are a brand that creates high quality stuff for gentlemen, not just in the clothing world, but I'm also thinking about having a nice Chesterfield sofa, right? And becoming a lifestyle brand, not for women, like just for gentlemen in that style. That's just something that I would find personally satisfying. So it's something that I would drive to, and I would use the revenue that I generate from the content to make that a reality, right? One of my kind of goals is not like, oh, I want to make $2 million or whatever, but it's like, I want to host a party at, the Rosecliff Mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, where people can all come and dress up and then learn from each other, hang out. And like, that's something where I'm like, that would get me really excited. Or how about, we rent a cruise ship on the Nile that, Agatha Christie's Poirot was on, and we do something like that, like events, and maybe we bring tailors. And that's something I'm like, I want to do that. I'm not like, I just want to see where I can make the most money and do that. I'm well off. Can I always make more? Sure. But do I want to increase the channel and build a team? And yes, I do, but not just so I can make easier money or money more quickly. So the answer is no. I would not say I'll just become a media company because that's where all the money is.
Well, no, the reason why I was asking, I mean, e-commerce, you use 3PL, so I guess it's less. But there's a lot more things to worry about, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't know what you do, but I like the complexity, figuring it out. And again, I always have that mindset of, if it's too easy, it's easier to replicate. So if it's more complex process, it keeps out all the amateurs, right? I felt like it about YouTube, for example. I was like, when I started, Facebook was still popular and you could get a lot of organic traffic, but then the barriers to entry were very low. And then Instagram, right? How many menswear Instagrammers are out there? A lot. Because what's the barrier to entry? You need a phone and a filter, and that's it. Well, with YouTube, to make consistently good videos, you need the gear. You need the people to edit and put it all out. So now you're talking, there's a competitive pool of 20, maybe in the largest sense, right? So I always like that, being among fewer and not trying to flip houses, right? Because there's just no one is doing it.
I totally agree. This is why all those e-commerce business models out there that appeal to most people, they're easy, but because they're easy, they're actually hard.
In the long term, right? Easy to get in, but then to kind of stay in there, remain successful, building something that I think gets much harder. And that's why I like it, right? It's like, okay, like if you want to do YouTube and consistently, I mean, we have a huge expense around that, right? That's our marketing expense. Most people don't think, they think marketing and e-commerce, they immediately go to paid ads.
Yep.
And we're different. We're like, no, for us, marketing is everything that we do to bring the product to market, which for us is just that content, basically.
Cool. I mean, that's the way to build a brand. I mean, in many ways, though, pay-per-click is faster, right? I mean, you can just drive traffic right away, whereas your content method is more of like a slow burn, right? A slow ascension.
Exactly. And
more solid foundation.
Yeah, and we also look at videos, sometimes you have videos that just are really strong out of the gate, and then they stop. And then there are other videos, you start, and they're just like slow burner, but over time get you all that, traffic, attention, and a brand recognition. And I mean, if you look back, right, I mean, Ralph Lauren didn't make content and create a great brand. There's lots of brands that didn't create that content. It was just one avenue that was available to me, and I kind of liked it. I'm also a bit, kind of bummed. I think I just never figured out how to do paid ads. I think there was a time when if you figured it out, we could have grown much faster and done things differently. So I'm not saying, paid ads are bad and you shouldn't do them. I'm just like, it didn't work for us.
Right.
I felt like this was more in my wheelhouse. And I think when you talk to different people as an e-commerce, everyone figured out an angle that worked for them. Some people are really active on Reddit. Other people are really active in a forum. Other people do this, right? And I've not met anyone who's like, I'm the gorilla on all the platforms, right? Some people do podcasting and they love it and it works really well for them. And I've thought about podcasting and was like, nah, the barrier to entries are lower, right? What do I need? A Focusrite box, a nice microphone. It's easier. I just sit down. And it's also probably because I personally don't listen much to podcasts because I don't like commuting. Then I'm not,
right.
I don't naturally think of it. But I realized there's an audience on every platform. There's people who like clothes who love podcasts or videos or Instagram accounts. It's not this like, oh, people who make that amount of money, they don't watch YouTube videos or they don't listen to podcasts. I don't think that's true. I think you can find people everywhere. And it's just what jives with you and your channel. And I think if there was one new channel we'd focus on right now, it would be LinkedIn. Because I feel like that jives the most with the kind of person that, we may be looking at. It wouldn't be like TikTok, and sometimes, or it's funny, right? When these new trends come along, like YouTube Shorts, for example, we haven't made a single YouTube short video yet. And it's interesting when you talk to other people who've experimented with it and, YouTube obviously recognizes, hey, this is your channel. I don't think it cannibalizes the overall watch time you have. And maybe we're losing out, but it's like, that's a bit more, it's just like dopamine rush, right? Oh, 1 minute short video. And I'm not saying we're never going to do that. So far, it just hasn't fit into our brand strategy. So we skipped that.
You got to finish your dance lessons first. You're not done taking your dance lessons, right?
Well, yeah. And but maybe it's wrong. Like there's always this opportunity and there's so much opportunity, right? Oh, I could do attentive text message marketing, right? Or I could use Klaviyo. I could do this. I could do that. And what I noticed is like, I'm actually better off if I focus on one thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Figure out and do it right, rather than trying to dance everywhere. Not well, because I don't know all the dances.
That's actually great advice for anyone listening. If you want to see more amazing interviews with successful entrepreneurs, then check out this next interview right here. I think you'll enjoy it and you'll definitely be inspired.